Have you ever wondered what your dreams mean? Join us in Dream School at thisjungianlife.com and find out. Jung wrote, "Dreams are a little hidden door in the innermost and most secret recesses of the soul."
Dream School is a unique, self-paced online program you can start at any time that unlocks access to your inner world. Our 12-month program provides the support, knowledge, and guidance you need to reach within, decipher your personal dream code, and harness it to optimize your life. By enrolling, you'll join an affirming community of fellow travelers, each pursuing a unique quest.
And it's fun. Join us on an adventure to wholeness and healing through understanding your dreams. Go to thisjungianlife.com and click on Dream School. You'll be taken to our secure checkout. Once you join, you'll get immediate access to our first 3 modules. You can get started right away. We look forward to seeing you there.
Welcome to This Jungian Life. 3 good friends and Jungian analysts, Lisa Marciano, Deborah Stewart, and Joseph Lee, invite you to join them for an intimate and honest conversation that brings a psychological perspective to important issues of the day.
I'm Lisa Marciano, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Philadelphia.
I'm Joseph Lee, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
I'm Deborah Stewart, a Jungian analyst on Cape Cod.
Today on the podcast, we wanted to talk about doubt. The dictionary tells us that doubt is a feeling of uncertainty or lack of conviction. Doubt is a daily experience for most of us. It can be a painful one, but it might also bring benefits with it. So we wanted to open it up today and circumambulate this concept and see what there is in it for us.
So the first thing that comes to mind is the polarity that is invoked when we talk about doubt. And I find myself thinking about doubt versus certainty, doubt versus absolutes, doubt versus being overconfident. And I find myself feeling the tension, the pull between the polarities when we invoke this.
And I think about the polarities between the inner and the outer world, of the doubt about doing something in the outer world, of should I do this? What kind of decision should I make? That there are external world realities that aren't known or not known completely. But then there's the internal world doubt of, will I be enough to manage this? Is the risk feeling like it's going to be manageable for me, or is it going to be too much for me? So I think that doubt really tangles us up in the outer world situation and in our inner world situation.
You know, if we think about it just in the most basic terms, we're all in doubt all of the time because we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. So I don't know, you make your coffee and you get in the car to go to work that morning, and in some sense, you don't doubt that you're going to arrive at work, but of course, that's a possibility. Kind of learning to live with doubt is a very basic part of being able to manage one's life. And I think that it is uncomfortable. We don't want to have to be in that doubt place. We want to find a landing point of certainty. And so there can be a tendency to defend against doubt.
Well, doubt could be thought of in that regard as a wise minister or a counselor who's kind of standing behind you and bringing up perhaps inadequately considered dynamics. So we decide that we're going to take a course of action. It seems normal and intelligent that there should be a kind of far-sighted voice saying, well, these could be the outcomes, this could be the challenges, this is something to consider, that we can't have ultimate power over all of these factors. Do we have the resources to do this? So there's a kind of wise consideration. Corporations do this all the time. Like when they contemplate setting in motion a new product, they work out all kinds of contingencies and all kinds of safeguards. So if something does not happen by a certain time, they kind of bail on the project. So there is a thoughtful process that when we weigh things out may allow us to overcome that feeling of doubt, and also may validate that feeling of doubt that something really is a crummy idea and we shouldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
It can help us prepare.
Right.
But what if this happens?
Mm-hmm.
Or, I don't know. I doubt that might really work out, that we could really arrange a meeting in this far-flung place. Well, okay, that does help us construct a good map and avoid giant rivers or unscalable mountain peaks.
I think it gets really knotted up when the feeling of doubt does not have enough conscious process around it, because doubt can become a mood. And then when it becomes a mood, it's like a doubt complex that then kind of poisons things that frankly might be rather simple and direct.
Mm-hmm.
And we're left in a kind of crippling doubt, which can interfere with us taking effective action, sometimes even in small things. I've had some clients over the years feel incredibly resistant to even trying a new restaurant because they doubt whether or not the food will be pleasurable enough, which to me seems like a very narrowing life.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we've been talking about the possible benefits of doubt, and there's something really necessary about allowing doubt and allowing yourself to stay in it, but then knowing when to move out of doubt into action. And sometimes it's difficult to stay in the doubt and have that experience of weighing one thing over another. And for some people, Joseph, and what you're talking about is it can be difficult to move out of doubt into action, to say, well, I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but I can step forward into a course of action regardless.
And I was thinking that it's also possible to stay in the doubt and still move into action. It's not necessary to have my doubts resolved.
That's a great point.
I'm not sure, but it's time to do it anyway. There's a great quote from Shakespeare in Measure to Measure. He says, "Our doubts are traitors and make us lose the good we oft might win by fearing to attempt." And so sometimes I think it's important to just say, look, it's better to take the risk and do something rather than wait until I feel all fine and resolved about it. So some of it is we're in doubt, but we still have to move into life.
Right.
And that makes me think that, as you're saying that sometimes, it's not all that often, but I'll run into a client who has a kind of fantasy of certainty. And I'm not even sure where they got it from. But there's this kind of ephemeral ghost that kind of whispers to them saying that unless you're in a state of absolute certainty, then everything is utterly dangerous. And I wonder where people get that from, how they get infected with that.
This is a very relevant question for psychotherapists, because oftentimes people come into therapy or analysis because they're trying to make a decision and they have doubts. And so I think, we can see the pattern that you just pointed to, Joseph, that people are looking for absolute certainty. We can also see people going through a kind of defensive process to arrive at certainty, to avoid the discomfort of doubt. Jung says that fanaticism is always a sign of repressed doubt. And we can look in ourselves and say, where is my fanaticism? We're all fanatical about something sometimes. And when you find yourself having this high degree of certainty, it's a good idea to wonder what's been split off and put into the unconscious. What don't I want to know about? because I must have doubt if I'm feeling that certain. When someone comes in and is working with me on a decision, like, for example, to take a big life step, change a career, leave a marriage, apply to graduate school, something like that, what I'll often say is, we're not looking for certainty because we can't find that. But what I do wish for you is that you will find clarity. And I think that goes to what you were talking about before, Deb, about, listen, we're going to have doubts, but we can still move forward.
I find also what you've said makes me think about how people want to understand and see the whole picture ahead of time versus sometimes the journey is step by step. You have to start down the road and you don't have the whole map. And the image I often use is sometimes life is a little bit like the Lewis and Clark journey. You just have to head west and hope for the best, hope you'll be met, hope that a guide will appear as it did for Lewis and Clark. You'll figure out how to get over the Colorado, the Rocky Mountains. And that we are often just such thinking conceptual creatures that it's like, no, first show me the map. And then show me all the possible detours and alternate routes before I make a move.
And in a way, that's looking for kind of a guarantee.
Yeah.
Can you guarantee me I will get there? Can you make me certain that everything will be okay? And of course, we can't.
Yeah.
And how seductive it is when certainty is promised.
Yes.
And how many people have purchased property, for instance, that they shouldn't have purchased because someone sold them on this certainty of appreciation or this certainty that right now it's a deal, but in a few years, this is going to be worth I'm certain that's going to be true. So we can be seduced by certainty, both in ourselves, but also easily with other people in marketing. Run on this certainty of cure.
And I think that political ideologies or religious ideologies promise that same kind of certainty and are likewise seductive. And I have this wonderful quote from James Hollis. He says, "Doubt is unsettling to the ego, and those who are drawn to ideologies that promise the dispelling of doubt by proffering certainties will never grow. In seeking certainty, they are courting the death of the soul." Which is a fascinating idea that somehow doubt is the space we need to be in order to allow soul to flourish and grow. And I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Yes, and it's in the doubt, in a normal measure of doubt, that the irrational has to be honored. That the ego is not the sole decider of the outcome of our best laid plans. And so to have some sense of doubt is to also to be able to imagine that you will be surprised by something, which, by the way, could mean that it's better than you thought it was going to be.
Right.
But to be sure that the irrational, the unconscious, is going to make this a little bit different than your ego could have mastered.
I really like that, Joseph. And it brings me to this thought that certainty is a real ego place.
Yeah.
Do you feel certain when you feel certain, you are in your ego, and that doubt is the experience of being in dialogue with the unconscious, because there are in all of us multiple perspectives, multiple myriad ways of looking at things or feelings about things. And of course, this is edging into the concept of ambivalence a little bit, which is related to doubt. But when we can stay open to that experience of knowing that there are parts of us that may not have the same game plan that the ego has, then we will be in an experience of doubt. But that is a really constructive place.
There's a place in all of us with certainty and ego and control. I want to know all the variables. I want to know what I'm getting into before I get into it versus the unconscious and all those other parts of ourselves, and trusting somehow that something will come up to meet us, that there is more to us than just our egos. And there's a little quote from Jung from the Red Book. It says, "But you grow if you stand still in the greatest doubt. And therefore, steadfastness in great doubt is a veritable flower of life. And I think that's lovely of be in the doubt and don't attempt to vanquish it through ego's desire for certainty and control.
That's really lovely. If you look up the etymology of doubt, it goes all the way back to the root of meaning two, as in the number two things. And I think there it is. There's the ego attitude, and then there's also the other thing.
So doubt and double both have the same kind of root of that word. So when people are locked in doubt, or they're crippled in doubt, which is, of course, the most extreme example of it, there's a couple of things that I often try to explore with people. One is, do they have an underlying belief that life moves from frozen state to frozen state? That often underneath the doubt is that whatever they choose will become a permanent condition. So sometimes crippling doubt can be softened when people adapt something of a Buddhist idea that all experience rises, all experience sustains for a while, and all experiences dissolve, and the cycle comes around and around. So even if we do make a choice, which in retrospect we think, not the best choice, but to remember that all things are moving. Everything is in motion, including you. So if we can ride on that feeling that things are moving and will be moving, sometimes that can temper that fear of permanency of choice.
The other thing around choice that I'm aware of and have worked with people to think about is that sometimes you can really do a kind of taste before you jump in with your whole body. For example, I think, Lisa, you mentioned grad school as a big life choice that can come up. Okay, well, why not take a couple of courses or audit a couple of courses? Thinking about a big geographic move, well, go there and spend a week. There are often ways where we can have a sense of the experience before having to leap in with both feet. Or, as I like to say, it doesn't always have to be like skydiving. It's not always an all or nothing kind of setup.
So we can gather experiential data through kind of micro experiments.
Yes.
And then build a kind of image of what something might be like if we fully committed.
Exactly. And as you say, too, experiences rise and they change. That is the way of things. It's not permanent.
And there's a way that doubt can keep us nimble as we navigate changing experiences. I worked for some time with a mom who was homeschooling her kids. And she had a lot of doubt as to whether or not this was the best thing to do. And for a while, it was really crippling and uncomfortable. And she would come in and she would kind of wring her hands about, is this really what I should be doing? And talk about how terrible it felt to be doubting this decision all the time. And we finally got to this place where we just sort of said, well, maybe your doubt is just going to be part of it. And she did ease into that, where she just sort of accepted she would have these doubts, just pretty much daily, that was just sort of normalized. It just became normalized for her. And eventually she found that this was really, really helpful because it kept her always in an evaluative process about whether this was working for her, whether this was working for her kids. And apropos of the Jung quote that I shared earlier, she was aware that some people in the homeschooling community did flip into a kind of fanaticism about it. And she said, well, at least I'm not doing that. At least I'm not becoming a fanatic. I may be kind of tormented with my doubt, but I'm staying there. And eventually it was, very easy for her to decide, when the time was right, that she was going to stop homeschooling. So it's the way that doubt can befriend us and keep us open always to change, to shifting, to pivoting, to not landing on something, Joseph, as you said, and expecting it to be a frozen state, but acknowledging that it might change at any minute. And I want to just augment this with a quote from Barbara Hanna, who said, "There is something divine about doubt which keeps you struggling," which was absolutely this woman's experience. Barbara Hanna goes on to say, "The gift of doubt is often the crown of life." And it does, I think this is what we said before, it keeps you growing.
It would be an interesting cultural experiment if we were to abandon the word doubt and replace it with dialogue.
I like that.
Yeah, it's just that for people, not to say that I doubt that, but to be able to say, I'm in dialogue with that. I'm in dialogue internally and or externally. And when that dialogue gets to a kind of critical moment, I may feel something shift inside of me and a gradient will form. And then I'll move in a direction. But that doubt is really just dialogue in the best sense.
Right. So allowing for doubt allows us to continue to have an internal dialogue between ourself and ourself.
I really like that a lot. That's a great shift from doubt to dialogue. And then I'm going back to the Barbara Hanna quote you gave us, Lisa. It's also struggling and being willing to struggle, that it's not awful to be in a struggle with yourself. Maybe that's just sort of out there at one end of the bell curve on dialogue.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we're talking also about holding the tension of the opposites. We haven't said that yet, but we're in that territory of there's one thing and there's another thing. And can we hold them both and allow room for them both? There's a concept called intellectual humility, which is a way of being. It's an attitude that you can cultivate where you are not so sure all the time about your abilities, about your knowledge, that you're always open to reevaluating. And taken too far, it makes it difficult to know what you know. But it can be tremendously useful. For one thing, it helps us work against the dangers of confirmation bias, which, I think we could all use a little of in this day and age. We all tend to get locked into what we know. But I think cultivating intellectual humility means being able to be very comfortable doubting ourselves in a constructive way.
So that it's like the self-reflective process, even about something really very, very simple. But this is the way I've always made lasagna. Now, wait a minute. Maybe I could reflect on that a little bit and be open to this idea. Just have a little bit of a recursive process of loop back, reflect for a moment, be in a kind of healthy doubt or dialogue with myself.
And isn't that what dreams help us with? Because dreams will bring in the doubt that's missing. So if we're feeling very certain about something or very sure, very pleased, the dream may show it in a different light.
And then that leads to a dialogue, that there's an unconscious attitude that needs to be acknowledged. There are several conscious attitudes that also need to be acknowledged. And this sets up a conversation. And that in that conversation, often energy increases, interestingly enough, that without the conversation, we actually tend to get fatigued more. We get droopier.
And that brings in the Jungian concept of compensation, that dreams compensate for the unconscious attitude. And in our waking life, reflection, inner dialogue, dialogue with other people can compensate for a tendency to do things the way we've always done them, or confirmation bias, or our fear of doing something different.
Joseph, I really appreciate what you said about the energy can actually increase as we have these dialogues. I just saw that this week with someone who was really just feeling kind of in a slump. And we started talking about a big decision that's coming up for this person. And there's a lot of doubt, there's a lot of uncertainty, but just naming that it was there and beginning to walk around it, it just felt a lot better. So I think that's absolutely right. There's something draining about not allowing it.
Not allowing the shadow versus inviting shadow into the room. Come on, talk to us.
Right.
That's often where the treasure is found.
Yes. And as you said, Deb, the compensation kind of brings the missing thing. So no wonder we feel more vivified.
Another dynamic that I find with people who are sitting in a lot of doubt, an excessive amount of doubt, is that there's often a regression that is hidden in the doubt. And it sounds like, I'm not sure I'll like it. And when something is brought down to such a young level, like, I like it, I don't like it. What if I don't like it? I know that we're really talking about parent-child dynamics and whether or not some kind of authority complex is pushing something along, and the child in us, is using one of the few weapons that children often have to push back, which you hear from kids all the time, little kids, is, I don't like it. I don't like it. Which, of course, implies that you should like everything.
So are you sort of saying that when we're locked in doubt, that it's a kind of stubbornness, or some part of the psyche is really kind of locking into a particular agenda and working against moving forward into life? Is it something like that, Joseph?
Well, it's that, but also that there's a regression, that when doubt starts building hotly, sometimes the ego doesn't know what to do. It swings backward to a younger perspective, to a younger version of ourselves. And then our arguments can start to sound like a kid's argument. What if I don't like it? I don't want to try that food because what if it doesn't taste good? And we have to be able to see the inner child in us sometimes that is spinning around in the anxiety of doubt, and really how problematic that is. Because if we really listen to our concerns, addressing concerns at that level are inadequate in a complicated adult world. Like, if a client is really telling me the criteria of the decision is whether or not I'm going to like it, and it doesn't go any further than that, that's a dangerous stuck place. Because generally speaking, there have to be a lot more advanced, intellectually vibrant considerations about, let's say, buying a new house or getting divorced or getting married. Whether or not I'm going to like it is a little one-dimensional. But when we're feeling really young, it's pretty one-dimensional.
I'm wondering, though, if what you're saying, Joseph, could take us into a place we haven't talked about yet, which is real crippling doubt and fear about taking a step that just feels too big. And the person might be able to say, well, what if I don't like it? Or what if I'm in over my head? Is another way of thinking about it. And that there are situations where things are too much for a given person. And that it goes to a really early place, the child place of not being enough, not developed enough, and perhaps an early place of shame of I will be an abject failure, and then my worst fears about myself will be confirmed. And I think that has a really different and important feeling tone to it.
What I'm resonating with is this fear of failing. That we have memories of failing. We can't reach adulthood without memories of failing. And for some of us, myself included, spectacular failures. And when we have experiences that have very intense, painful feelings woven into them, they become a complex. And I'm familiar with the failure complex. So if that gets evoked around a decision point, that can really lock us up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think what I'm thinking about here is ego strength.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going back to your image of, a child and all he or she can say is, but what if I don't like it? I don't think those Brussels sprouts are going to be good at all.
I don't trust them.
No, I don't trust them. They're weird. But, that if we take it, sort of several levels up and amplify it, of that the child would go into not over Brussels sprouts, but over something else, a state of real terrible fear that's destabilizing. I think that can happen for people who are really seized in a certain way by doubt that is truly crippling, a place of real deep stuckness that's about much more than should I do A or should I do B.
I think the doubt is also a particularly modern experience because it used to be that we had these collective norms in religion or in our culture that could point very clearly to the right values. We all shared more or less the same values, but in our more individualistic society, it's more up to the individual to sort through what are my values, what does feel right or wrong, so that when we come to some of these large questions, we have to bear more doubt because we have fewer signposts that are handed to us by the collective. Hamlet is particularly modern in that sense. That when he first hears the testimony of the ghost, he feels certain about it and he's going to take action. But as the play progresses, he gets more and more uncertain, and he realizes he struggles with the fact that it's impossible to be absolutely certain about anything.
It reminds me of what you're saying, Lisa, of marketing research that says if you give somebody too many choices, it paralyzes them. And one of the benefits and problems of modern culture is that we have many, many more choices than we did in a more ancient society or more traditional society. Lots more choices is harder for us as human beings and requires a lot more thought and forecasting than following just the little groove through the village.
I think what we're saying here about cultural norms, expectations, and just structuring is so important. In all of human millennia for thousands of years, individuals have never had as much responsibility for deciding what they want to do with their lives. Work, go to school, get married, have kids, buy a house. There's a lot that is placed on the individual that absolutely depends on ego strength, and often at a very young age.
Yeah. And again, if we aren't given these things by the culture, if they're not handed to us by the collective, then we really fall into ourselves. And Jung talks about this in numerous places, that we have to have these dialogues with ourself about what our values are, what our ethics are, what matters to us. We have to find something within to engage, to find that deep sense of knowing. Otherwise, we will be tempted to fall into a different kind of manufactured certainty.
I'm finding myself pivoting to a whole other world around doubt, which is the doubt around what's even real, which is something that people can bring in if they are raised in particularly truth-violating homes. It's not uncommon for a parent to have a tremendous secret. Maybe it's drug addiction. Maybe it's infidelity. Maybe it's something totally different. But it's the secret that's moving through the house, and everybody is being told that it isn't true. And so when we're young and our instinctive sense of what the facts are constantly being invalidated, we can reach adulthood not knowing how to discern what's true or what's not. And of course, right now we're in like a national crisis around this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point, Joseph. And I do see this particularly in people who grew up in homes where there was substance abuse. And one of the things that you doubt all the time is yourself.
Yes.
And you doubt your instincts, and you doubt your feelings, and you doubt what you know. And it can be an extraordinary uphill battle to find that kind of little square foot of surety where you can stand firm.
And the firmness is, I know what's true, or at least I know elements of truth, and the elements of truth that I can lay hold of, I won't let go of, and they become a cornerstone to build some kind of structure of decision, structure of orientation. One of the things that I think we're dealing with really problematically in the culture is that media, and particularly social media, has shifted around so that it really is simply a form of entertainment and stimulation, and no longer is related to facts or truth. And that our, at least American culture, perhaps all over the world, but our culture hasn't evolved to create that kind of objectivity around social media. That the most of what we're reading in memes and YouTube and Facebook are really just fiction.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is so important, that we come to doubt, if we're raised in this kind of a home, we doubt ourselves. We doubt what is going on in the greater world around us. It's not clear what's really truth. It's not even clear what is really fact. And we can lose ourselves easily in this morass of external world confusion, whether that's because of being raised in a home where there were difficulties, and in a wider culture where similarly people are maybe more interested in propounding a narrative than being grounded in fact, or thinking of others first.
And if we have been raised in a subculture or a home where the authority, whether it's a church authority or a parent, is the deciding voice of what is true and real, and that everybody else is expected to cluster around the voice of authority, it makes us incredibly vulnerable later in life to do the same thing. That because someone presents as an authority figure, then they must be knowing what's true, and my gut and my instinct, or even my self-interest for that matter, any of those voices inside of my body can't possibly be right.
Yeah.
I think the other thing this leans into is the relational aspect of doubt, and how a relational container can be a good place to help us know what's true about ourselves. I mean, ideally, when things go well, say between a mother and a child, or a caregiver and a child, is the caregiver more or less accurately reflects back to the child their self-state, their feelings, and over time the child internalizes this sense of what's real. And when we're adults, it can be incredibly helpful to us to bring our doubts to an attuned other who can help us reflect back both our doubts, but also perhaps what we might be missing. Yeah, relationships can be a crucible for holding and working through doubts.
Yeah. So we're pointing here to healthy doubt and the importance of reality checks, of being able to turn to someone and say, what about this? and get a reflection we could trust for its accuracy and fact. And of course, there are all kinds of sources in the world for checking things out. And I think we just want to support this kind of healthy doubt versus being sort of lost in a confusing morass where we can get to the point where we don't know what's really real and what we can really stand firm on or not.
What's coming up for me is this movie from 2008 called Doubt, which I believe was based on a play. And it's a wonderful movie that explores a lot of what we've been talking about. The need to double down on a particular belief and not let yourself experience doubt. The main character in the movie, who's played by Meryl Streep, develops this suspicion about this priest, and she becomes convinced that it's true. She won't allow herself to feel any doubt about her suspicions, even though there isn't a great deal of evidence. And she would like the story to be very, very simple. And when we're looking for certainty, we're looking for simplicity too. We know who the good guys are. We know who the bad guys are. It's very clear. The movie just makes it very abundantly clear that there's a lot more complexity and there's lots of room for doubt. And it just explores that.
So in the face of all of the nuances of doubt, justified, unjustified, brought on by complexes or childhood wounds or gaslighted by distorted information, at some point, human beings seem to be designed to strike a course, to launch, and to experience life with all of its uncertainties, and to be roused in their strengths and capacities by coming up against things they could not have planned for, and to discover, even if they have great doubts, that they have strength, they can meet difficulties, and perhaps even most importantly, they can ask for help. So this often, for me, evokes a certain heroic audacity, which at some point needs to rise up. And I'm going to throw out just a stanza of one of my favorite poems, Ulysses by Alfred Lord Tennyson. Odysseus has come back from his long adventures. He's taken over the kingdom. He's getting old. His son Telemachus is taking over the administrative duties. His wife is aging, and he's just sitting around, listening to people argue about land rights. And this is the guy who's like fought Cyclopses and escaped Circe's island. And so after recounting this incredibly boring life that he has, where things are, in fact, very predictable and rather certain, the poem ends with this. Come, my friends, 'tis not too late to seek a newer world. Push off, and sitting well in order, smite the sounding furrows, for my purpose holds to sail beyond the sunset and the baths of all the western stars until I die. It may be that the gulfs will wash us down. It may be that we shall touch the happy isles and see the great Achilles whom we knew. Though much is taken, much abides. And though we are not now that strength which in old days moved heaven and earth, that which we are. One equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. So let's strike the furrow and do a dream. A dream.
Just like, okay.
Okay.
Hi, this is Deb from This Jungian Life podcast. Joseph, Lisa, and I have been deeply moved by your response to our work, but producing, editing, and distributing it involves substantial expenses, and now we need your help. Please stop by our website, thisjungianlife.com, and click on the heading Be Our Patron. You'll be redirected to our Patreon funding page. Patreon helps creators connect with people who believe in projects like ours. There, you can sign up with your credit card to support us for as little as $1 a month. And at higher levels of support, we'll provide special episodes, behind-the-scenes photos and stories, and a chance to join a select pool of listeners for dream interpretations. Once again, please go to thisjungianlife.com and click on Be Our Patron. Thank you. Our dreamer this week is a woman. She's a data analyst, 32 years old. And here is the dream. I am going on a trip and traveling in a cab with friends. During the journey, it gets lively. We are excited. I am dancing, making promises to my friends that I'm not thinking about fully, and telling them how judgmental my father is. There is a lot of mess being made, which, too, I am clearing up. It seems like grass I am sweeping up, and there's a small pig, dog-like animal with us, but I'm caught up in the moment and not paying it too much attention. I get a feeling that my behavior is quite obnoxious in front of the driver, but I don't stop. We arrive at a boat port. There are lots of people and enormous boats. Everyone is getting their stuff loaded for their journeys. I check the time and realize we have 20 minutes to board the boat. I think, perfect. I get out of the car, look around, and as I turn back to the cab, I notice it drive off with my stuff. I panic and instantly think the driver didn't like me. That's why he drove off with my luggage. I start running after the car and notice others running after the car too. We run and keep up with the car, but are not able to reach it. Then one of the girls I'm running with says she has the driver's number on her phone. I shout at her to call him urgently. And for context, our dreamer says that day she had moved back home temporarily to live with her mother and her mother's partner. And she and her mother had not spoken for some months, but had recently repaired the relationship. And her main feelings in the dream were excitement and panic. And for earlier context, she says that her father left when she was very young and she doesn't speak to him very often.
So this is a dream about a father wound. I think it's interesting, actually, and I'm not quite sure what to do with this, that one of the things that comes up in the dream is that she's telling everyone how judgmental her father is. And I'm not sure if this relates to the personal father, since she doesn't, in fact, have a lot of contact with him, or if it's more of a statement about the way the father complex operates in her psyche. And if your father left you early on and you haven't had much contact, what you have experienced is rejection. And so the father complex would be really colored by that experience. And you might experience a kind of inner judgmental voice. So the positive pole of the father archetype is ordering, law-giving, fairness, kind of moving out into the world. The negative pole of the father archetype can be like this kind of Saturnian, critical, judgmental, or even tyrannical kind of energy. And she obviously is experiencing more of the negative pole of that complex / archetype. She's behaving in the car in a way that she has some awareness is kind of obnoxious, but she's not really tending to that. It's sort of high spirited. It's very kind of girlish. It's unmediated by a kind of necessary sort of father energy that might bring her down to earth. And as such, she's ignoring this animal in the car, which might be an image of a kind of a healthy instinct, perhaps. And of course, there's some link between the father and the driver, because she's worried that the driver has judged her and doesn't like her. So we could say something like the negative father complex is kind of driving the show here and threatening to kind of rob her of her things. I think it's positive that the dream ends with her saying that you've got to call the driver, because what is needed is, I think, to integrate some of the energy that's now being held by the father archetype or the father complex.
Well, Lisa, I think you've really done a wonderful job of laying out the dynamics of this dream. I'm kind of going back through it with more of a fine-tooth comb to pay attention to some of the details of how all these dynamics get depicted. She is excited when she's going on this trip in a cab with friends. She's dancing, making promises to her friends that she's not thinking about fully, telling them how judgmental her father is. Then there's mess. She's clearing it up, sweeping up grass, this pig dog-like animal. And she notices that she thinks the driver thinks her behavior is obnoxious. There is an awful lot of impulsive, scattered, kind of flighty stuff going on in this cab.
Mm-hmm.
She's not grounded. The dream ego is not grounded and is going off in at least 6 different directions.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, they get to the port where people are getting on boats. So I'm thinking about the implications of what does it mean to be going on a boat? You know, my association or fantasy here is that it will be on the ocean, and possibly some implication of, you know, the ego stuff of boats and steering and mechanization and control on the great sea of the great unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
And then her projection that because the driver drove off that he didn't like her.
Yeah.
But it has a positive license with her. One of the girls has the driver's phone number and can call. So some part of her shadow is able to take positive, effective action. I'm also thinking about how you mentioned the negative father complex, Lisa, but in addition to a judgmental, critical father, which she mentions in the dream, this is a father who left her when she was small.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking the negative father can also be insecure, weak, kind of flaccid, and uncontactful, and just kind of absent, which in a very literal way her father was.
Yeah.
So what are you thinking, Joseph?
Well, I'm agreeing with both of you that it circles around the father complex, and that the dream is ambivalent, that there's a positive potential in the dream. It's pointing to some problems in the dream. I'm wondering if this is the kind of dream that is trying to talk to her about either attention deficit disorder or perhaps even the idea of the manic defense.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, the dream is about her becoming either uninhibited or disinhibited, which is something that she'd have to kind of iron out, you know, with a trusted therapist. But her inhibitions kind of slip away. And once she becomes uninhibited, the judgmental father complex arrives. So I would be wondering about exploring that with her. When you become less inhibited, does this judging father arrive, just as you said, in a Saturnine way, perhaps to offer a compensation for an excessive amount of disinhibited behavior? It's trying to rein her in. She puts it aside, and suddenly there's mess everywhere, and there's a pig dog animal in the room. You know, lots of kids are called pigs, particularly if they're really messy. You've got a young ADD girl in the house, and she's super messy, not terribly structured. This idea of, you know, you're just a pig. And I think that that's perhaps even a memory that when she gets messy, she becomes a bit of a pig dog. This provokes some anxiety. She is not going to pay too much attention, she says. Again, we're back to perhaps an ADD homage there. She could be, in fact, suddenly becoming obnoxious. She doesn't care. So that's some of the tension between the Saturnine father complex and the girl in her that wants to break free and discover her own limits without parental figures trying to determine them for her. I think the idea that she has a pending boat journey is really interesting. I mean, traveling across the seas is a particularly interesting kind of traveling versus flying or a train or driving. There's something really exposing about being on a boat journey, that you are in direct contact with this fathomless ocean of energy and subconscious, unconscious events. And, it requires an enormous amount of fortitude and skill to be traveling across the seas. And again, there's another absent-mindedness that happens. Yes, she wants to say that the cab driver drove off with her luggage, but also she forgot her luggage. She wasn't tending to her luggage. And all of a sudden she's in a kind of chaotic panic that she's not going to have her familiar objects as she's preparing to launch onto this journey. If we think of the dream maker providing medicinal experiences, that there's a journey that she needs to go on, and traveling with comforts and familiarity is not going to be tolerated. That there are some journeys that we have to go on naked and exposed and without the familiar comforts. And it may very well be at some point she'll have to decide, will I walk up the gangplank and get on the boat, missing the things that I find familiar? Yeah. Or am I going to stay on land and try to just restore my persona regressively?
It really lifts up that question of luggage as baggage, and in the common parlance of, I'm carrying a lot of baggage, and whether that's old complexes and things we really need to let go of, or whether that's stuff that will support us on this pending ocean journey of equipment and things that will support ego functioning. That would be something to explore with the dreamer, and it may be both.
She says she's moved back home temporarily to live with her mom and her partner, and she and the mom had only recently repaired the relationship. And this brings up again the possibility of a manic defense, that sometimes some of us are wired when we're very anxious to spin upward, to kind of vault into a giddiness as a way of getting away from the tension. And she says she hadn't talked to her mom for 9 months. And then she suddenly is living with her mom. So I can imagine a certain kind of giddiness sweeping around in her psyche as a way of compensating for that. So to me, the medicine comes into having a more conscious relationship with the father principles, trying to bring forward applications of that on a conscious level because she was deprived of a biological father, and to wonder what's the best way to be judging things correctly, not judgmental, but intelligent use of judgment, and how to bring order into her life in a way that she doesn't experience as oppressive, but allows, what she's responsible for to flourish.
Jung talks about how the personal parent, the personal father, the personal mother is that which mediates the archetype. And if we haven't had much of an experience with a personal father, then the archetype remains more or less unmediated, which means it's operating in our life in a kind of raw, form with a lot of archetypal voltage running through it. And I think that this dream maybe shows that. But Joseph, you were just saying so beautifully that she needs to integrate some of this ordering principle that comes with the father energy. And we can see that she hasn't had much of an opportunity to do that because she hasn't had that mediating personal presence.
So by the time we're adults, she's 32, the ego often has to step up and consciously take hold of things. If we were not raised by a mother who is either accessible or present at all, we often have to wake up and say, I've got to learn about self-care because I just don't have any experiences of that. Or I have to learn about ordering my life because I just don't have a lot of experience about it. And we can do this. We have this incredible capacity to decide we're going to acquire a skill set. It may never feel as instinctive as we would like it to be, but like anything else, like learning a new language, we decide we're going to learn it, we rehearse it, we lay down some patterns, and then we can count on it being there.
And I'm aware that one of the things in the dream that the dream ego has going for it that speaks to what you both are addressing is that she has friends.
Mm-hmm.
She's in the cab with friends. And then at the end, others are running after the car too. So it implies peer relationships or shadow functions where there's a connection. It's a little diffuse. It's a little fragmented. Nobody is identified by name or description, but there are these energies that are companioning her that I think kind of give a hint as to a lot of good possibility lying ahead for her to do the things you guys were just speaking of.
The other thing that I think is encouraging as well is there's really nothing disastrous that's happening in the dream. I mean, of course, it's inconvenient to get on the boat and have to buy a bunch of stuff that you weren't planning on buying. Is that workable? It's workable.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You know, sometimes we enter into certain life journeys a little frayed. And so if that's the way she's going to enter into the journey across the seas, that's her way. You know, it's definitely survivable.
Right. That's a good point.
You've been listening to This Jungian Life. From our website, thisjungianlife.com, you can follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, help us produce future episodes by funding us through Patreon, and submit your dreams for possible interpretation on another episode. We'd like to thank our listener who shared a dream for today's show and hope you'll let us know what topics you'd enjoy hearing more about. Until next time, keep living this Jungian life.